Hello and welcome to Is Climate Change Your Concern? A podcast where we discuss approaches to climate action and explore practical actions that benefit both our well-being and the health of our planet. I'm your host Anirudh Nanda, and join me each week as we embark on this journey to turn concern into action. India has the largest education system in the world, with nearly 1.489 million schools, more than 9.5 million teachers, and nearly 265.2 million students. These numbers highlight the immense potential of raising a whole generation of climate champions. But what are the key strategies we can use to educate these students about our environment and climate change? What is the evolution of climate education in India? Is the national education policy of 2020 sufficient to bring about transformational change? What are the different approaches that schools can adopt to achieve this goal? To discuss all of these questions and more, I have with me Mr. Ashok Pandey, a celebrated educator with over 30 years of experience in transforming schools and inspiring countless students. He has played a pivotal role in introducing global goals and global citizenship education in schools across the country, and has written extensively on the intersection of National Education Policy 2020 and Sustainable Developmental Goals. His efforts have been recognized worldwide with accolades including the National Teacher Award in 2012 and the Extraordinary Leadership Award in 2021 by Education World. Thank you so much, Ashok sir, for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Anirudh, for having me on your podcast, and that too on a topic which both of us at this point of time are suffering. You in Chandigarh and me in Delhi.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. So, can we begin by just understanding what climate education is and its importance?
Yes, I'll come to climate education a bit later. Let me tell you how I have grown. That is very, very important. And I have grown in a village surrounded by rows of trees and mainly mango trees and a host of other trees. Neem, many people may not have heard the name, mahua, people, bakar, a lot of trees. And also the village surrounded by a lot of water bodies, right? You just imagine. Now, morning and evening and the summer vacations, everything with our friends, we spent in those gardens and we spent around these water bodies. Can you imagine that as a child, I have also plucked in the pond the water chestnut, as we call it, which many of the youngsters today may not have seen it, going deep into it up to water up to your waist and all that. Why I mention all these things. It is very significant for a person who has grown up in this environment, and 40 years down the line, you go to the same village, not a single tree, not a single water body. So you just see the difference, what has happened. So this makes you think that in my own lifetime, I have seen these two extremes, if I can use the word, right? And we used to sleep outside under the neem tree. And now people just don't know, even in the villages. Of course, fans are there, electricity is there, better than what it used to be. There is no respite from the heat. So, what have we done? Now, come to the city life. Most of the people have migrated to cities. The children who are in city, they may not have experienced villages. But one thing they have experienced, that in the last 20, 25, 30 years, in cities like Delhi or any other city, not only in India, but also abroad, the average annual temperature has risen up. The schools where I worked, fans were there, ACs were not there. Now there is a huge demand and pressure for ACs. Most of the infrastructure was tin shaded, and that is just impossible for the children to sit there, even in the month of February and March and April. Forget about June and July, which has become extremely hot. So, a person who has come through this, person who has experienced this, A person who is in education and a person who sees that internationally there are extremities in drought, there are extremities in floods, there are extremities in landslides, the rising temperature, the economic cost of it, the migrations. So it has brought about what I can call an upheaval in the lives of the people. And therefore, it brings me to your first question, that what climate education means to me. So, what climate education means to me is this.
So you began your answer by saying an anecdote. Let me then go back to some of the historical notes and just try and realize that we are from India and we belong to the lands of rishis and gurus, and so many of our scriptures also happen to indicate that nature is referred to as God.
Yeah.
Having said that, do you think that we have been able to translate those cultural norms into our daily lives, or we've been successful in transmuting those cultural learnings into our education system?
Not at all. I'm very sorry to say that. And you must have seen the overwhelming tone in my no, because not only that we have not taken it forward as part of our custom. On the contrary, Anirudh, we have made mockery of it. And we thought that all these things are very ritualistic. Now, they are very regressive in thought. And we thought that why it was so. The young generation has never understood the science behind all these things. And therefore, in our climate education, science of climatic practices in our ancient time should also become integral to our science of climate education curriculum. You see, so in those days when I was in the village, one night we will go and eat under a tree, right? So that has its own significance. I said the water bodies. The water bodies were not just for that. In those ponds and in those water bodies, there were rituals, worshipping, gathering around that, sitting, discussing your problems, and so on and so forth. So, answer to your question that have we taken it forward? No, absolutely not. Not only that, we have not taken it forward, we have made fun of it. And the younger generation is very skeptic of those things. But thankfully, or let us say ironically, thankfully, all these things are haunting us today. And we are feeling the heat literally. And we are now going back to the basics, and we are thinking as to how to figure out the reasons and what practices to implement to get some relief.
So now coming back to the kind of role you have played in the education sector, you've dedicated your career transforming education. And in your experience, how has climate change become a pivotal concern within our Indian schools and education policy?
Yeah, so I think I will tell you something very interesting. Environmental education. That has been talked about for a very, very long time. And you will be surprised to know that in India, almost 2 decades ago, there was a case pending in the Supreme Court of India. And Supreme Court made it mandatory that every school and college should teach environmental education. Now, so that is the background. So of course, I mean, at that point of time, the concerns were raised, and environmental education was made very compulsory. So the environmental education books came, and there was a confusion that whether environmental education should be a separate subject, it should be integrated, every subject should have an element of environmental education, and all those debates went on. And by that time, the heat of that particular moment was down, and people forgot about it. Then came 2015, and 2015 again, the world came around, and they asked questions to each other, and they visualized, in my opinion, that if newly born child has a choice as to what kind of geography, what kind of family, what kind of circumstances, what kind of gender that child would have, if these choices were given, what are the anxieties that unborn child will have? And the anxieties were that the child would like to be born in an atmosphere where there is no discrimination, gender, economic, or otherwise. there is love, affection, and acceptance around. Everybody is economically prosperous. Nobody should be hungry. The climate should be taken care of, both on Earth, below Earth, above Earth. Everybody should have decent employment opportunity, and everybody should work together. That is the dream of an unborn child. Now, if that is the dream of an unborn child, who is going to fulfill that dream? And therefore, that responsibility came on the world leaders who were gathered there in the magnificent halls of the United Nations. And there came the articulated form of what we call the sustainable goals, United Nations sustainable goals. And those goals were based on these discussions, which I narrated to you just now. And they were based on these five principles of five pillars, and they all begin with P, incidentally, right? So, people and the prosperity of the people in conjunction with the planet to bring overall peace. And this is possible only when there is a partnership. So these five P's became the pillars of those 17 goals. And you will be happy to know that out of those 17 goals, three goals are directly dedicated to climate. And I think that is the new birth of the climate education in this world in 2015. And then they decided that all these targets, with all the goals and targets and indicators, they should be achieved as early as 2030. And then there was a movement across the world. And from there came the one of those goals, Anirudh, as you know, is the quality education and lifelong learning for all, the goal number 4. And therefore, people began to ask, is goal number 4 should be a goal, or it is a fulcrum for all other goals? And then it was decided that yes, it is a goal as a standalone goal also, but then certainly it is pivotal to all other goals. So if you have to educate people on climate, you have to have some kind of education, isn't it? So the answer to your question is that how did this climate education came to our consciousness? So I think that was the consciousness, or that was the awareness where and by that time, I think the world has become very wiser with the rising temperatures, the average global temperature, the targets were fixed, and then the conference of the parties every year, and then all the protocols and all the policies, and then focus on renewable energy and the alliances, and everything came together. So it was almost a tsunami of information on climate education, and also on what we call the consequences of climate change. So people are suffering. I mean, you see the extreme things, the kind of landslides and the kind of floods that we see today. We have not seen that. The heat stroke, the migration due to this. We have not seen it 30 years, 40 years ago, these things. So I think the sustainable developmental goals came at the very right time when when I think people were ready to accept it. Sometimes you don't see things unless there is some kind of experiential suffering behind it. And hence we started this education in our schools, and the UNESCO was in the forefront. In fact, all these multilateral agencies, Anirudh, they were assigned these goals, and they became the custodians of achieving these goals. So education primarily went to UNESCO, and UNESCO came out with a beautiful concept, what we call today is ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. And and how the campuses, should become hub of the climate change education, right? And how schools not only should do it as a standalone, they should involve the communities, the teachers' professional development, student-led movements, reaching out to the community. All those things came into our curriculum, and we redesigned the curriculum in a way in which every goal was embedded in our curriculum, and the pedagogy was readjusted to that. So you teach, let us say, for example, a balanced diet. So the balanced diet will immediately connect to goal number three, health and well-being. Let us say, for example, and a scarcity of water. Let us say, for example, will not only go to providing clean water to everybody, but it will also go to water conservation and and the resource mobilization. Then it will go to responsible consumption and production, and then ultimately it will go to climate education. So what happened was that the entire curriculum was dissected in such a way that we found some kind of interconnectivity among the disciplines. And that led to what we call multidisciplinary approach to teaching, and each goal further branching into many other goals. So that is how the climate education was mapped. The school campus was used as a learning aid, energy audit, recycling, the community projects such as composting, bringing back birds on the campuses. I mean, all those activities were done. I know in Delhi, some 15 years ago, I remember Sparrow in the State Board of Delhi. And 15 years ago, there was a study and that suggested that the sparrows have just disappeared from Delhi. And for that, we started what we call Bring Back Sparrows movement. And the children made nests, specially designed, comfortable, compassionate nests. They were put in the balconies of the houses. They were put on whatever trees we had. They were put on the campuses. And children were delighted to see the sparrows coming back. So, what I'm trying to tell you is that the children are our biggest resources, and children are our assets at the same time. And any movement that we want to begin, I think bringing them at center stage, because they are, after all, what is sustainability? Sustainability is making things better tomorrow, today, and also for tomorrow, isn't it? And tomorrow belongs to whom? Those who are younger today, those who are children today. And it is therefore in the fitness of things that we involve them today, and we let them know that we care for you, we are concerned about you, we are able to hold hands, we are able to what I call repent for the mistakes that we have made, and we are ready to transform.
Thank you so much, sir, for broadly outlaying what is the state of climate education. But if I may ask you, what is behind the curtains? So this is something that's happening and what is visible. But as you have gone from being a teacher to then again getting some management roles and then heading schools and then now heading group of institutions, I would be more interested to know what was your journey in including these aspects that's happening on national and international level into the daily lives of your management roles as a teacher, as an administrator, just so that listeners could take maybe notes or inspiration as to how they can include these aspects in their functioning.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing in this thing. Two or three things I would like to bring here. Number one, which is very important in my opinion, is that what is our role as a citizen of this country, and then what is our role as citizen of this world. So that is something very, very important, and we emphasize the fact that we have to be a global citizen without compromising on national identities. That is the stand that I take, and there is no conflict between the two. So I think we have to develop a global perspective because of the simple reason that we are not living anymore in an isolated world. So whatever happens in one part of the world, it has a huge bearing on the rest of the world. So we are interconnected. So it is this interdependencies that propels our children to have a global perspective. That is something very important. And then the mobilities have increased, the transportation has become very easy, the internet, and now the artificial intelligence, the communications. I mean, they are so fast, and they move with such a lightning speed. And therefore, we have to ensure that there is nobody hungry in this world, and there is nobody poor. There are no social injustices, right? And social injustices have been perpetuated and coming forth through a variety of reasons. And now the climate changes have also become one of the causes for that. So this is an additional thing which has come because we have not taken good care of our climate. And therefore, what you have asked is that where do I stand? I have seen clearly, as I said in the beginning, that we have gone through three stages in our life. The first stage was the stage of complete exploitation of nature. So that was the exploitative phase. The almost hilting to the depth the fossil fuels that we were so dependent on, isn't it? So I call it the exploitative phase, where not only that we exploit it in the false belief that we are developing and we are growing and we are advancing, what we also did in the process, knowingly or unknowingly, is that we severed our roots from the nature. So that was the first phase. In people of my generation, have spent most of their life. But in our lifetime, we enter into the second phase. And the second phase was what we call the replenishment phase. Oh my God, we have done such a huge, terrible mistake. So let us recycle, let us reuse it. So that era, if you remember, of recycling and reusing, all those things came. That was the second phase, which is still going on. We still talk about recycling, renewables. Okay, let us do the renewables and things like that. But now we have to switch over to the third phase. And the third phase is what we call rethinking and reimagination phase. That how do we come out of it? How do we make fundamental changes to our habits, to our consumption behavior, to our whole thought process, or let's say, in other words, the transformative phase. And this transformative phase should loop into what we call the same nature from where we severed ourselves. And therefore, what we have to tell our children and ourselves also, that we have to go back in the lap of the nature, because it is the nature actually from where all of us spring from. And therefore, this is the phase that we have to sustain. And for that, everybody has to work, and more so the schools, because schools are the citadels and they are the centers where the transformation takes place. And hence, every teacher should be a transformed person. So, how do you become transformed? That you understand what is the climate, what are the root causes of it, what is the science behind it, what can we do, how we have to refigure out our curriculum, how we have to change our pedagogies. So say for example, I'm reminded of, we made some changes in pedagogical practices also when it came to climate education. So if I say this is climate and that happens, children will fantasize it, they will get into some kind of romanticism for some time, but it does not last long, in my opinion. But you just flip it around and you ask them that you imagine that you live in a thick forest area where your family's livelihood is dependent on the forest, whether it is the forest produce, the medicinal plants and the herbs, or it is the tourism there, it is the clean water and the water sports and the fresh air and the rich soil which has not eroded. So you ask them that now you imagine that your family's living totally dependent on the forest, and that forest has been cut from the roots. Now, what are the consequences of it? So you lose fresh air, the soil erosion will begin in, the tourism will reduce, isn't it? So what will be the cost of that? What will be the cost of replacing for the fresh oxygen? What will be the cost of building barrages? What will be the cost of replacing your livelihood when no tourists are coming to your area, isn't it? The aquatic life has been disturbed. So we can give an interdisciplinary calculation to them, that you imagine all this and then you calculate the little cost of everything. Do a bit of a mathematics. So 1 hectare of forest, if it is lost, how much will it cost in terms of uh, replenishing the oxygen, building barrages, bringing in air conditioner for that matter, right? And then your tourism has gone, your aquatic life has gone. You calculate that cost. And if 1 hectare forest loss incurs that many millions, just imagine the entire world, if it is devoid of that forest, what will be the cost? I think children will be alarmed. So that is the kind of awareness, that is the kind of motivation, that is the kind of advocacy that we have to bring in our communications, we have to bring in our teaching, and we have to make this place a better place. That's what I can appeal.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving these examples as well. Now, I'm wondering, you talked about the third phase, that is the transformative phase. And I'm trying to think whether the policy which came out in 2020, the education policy, does that sufficiently redress the concerns for us to successfully come out of the transformative phase? Or there are significant loopholes that we need to
Yeah,
plug in to
yeah.
achieve that transformative phase?
Yes, I am very happy that you asked this question. So NEP clearly talks about sustainable developmental goals. It talks about climate education. It talks everything. But Anil, let me tell you, that is exactly what the beauty and the handicap of a policy is all about, right? The beauty of the policies is that all these words can be written there very beautiful. And the handicap is that they will remain there if it is not taken on the ground. So therefore, I would applaud the content of the NEP with a caution that if we do not implement it on the ground, it will only remain an ornament of well-crafted words in those 60 pages of national education policy. So therefore, I'm emphasizing again and again that the national curriculum framework, which has followed the policy, because that will be what will take us through the curriculum and the pedagogy and the goals. And the climate education should have a very lofty goal. We have to develop the competencies around it. And through innovative pedagogies, those competencies will have to be drilled in the present generation. And we have to find out what are the learning outcomes that we are expecting, and then how to assess it. That is the learning cycle. So the learning cycle ends at assessment, and then only the transformation will come. So if you go backward, the larger goal of climate education, isn't it? And then what competencies? So competencies here will not only be your knowledge and skill. The climate education competency demands that we bring in behavioral changes, because if the behavioral changes in our idea of consumption, in our idea of way of living, in our idea of being empathetic to the future generation, these are the changes which have to come. But the good thing is, Anirudh, I'll tell you that I have seen it, that the children are prepared to take these transformative measures. And this country has also done a lot of campaigns. Let's say, for example, I don't know you remember it or not, but in our childhood, for good years, right up to, I think, 15, 16, 20, 21 years, at all public places, people used to smoke. And we will cover our eyes and nose with something so that we don't inhale, because we became the passive smokers. And there was a campaign in this country, and now you don't see public smoking, at least to a large extent, isn't it? So awareness is key to bringing in behavioral transformation, right? In the schools and colleges, we have almost replaced our plastics. No plastic bottles are used. Now, water waste is reduced. The only thing that we do not have a control over is the air pollution, which is a very, very serious thing. So, all I'm trying to tell you is that the intent is not to be doubted. But unless, I say that values are very important. I mean, knowledge and skill is one thing, but your values and attitude are even more important thing. And as long as the purpose of education remains the same, organic growth in your from one degree to another, and then getting a job and settling down in life, that's fine. But alongside that, good of the society, good of the humanity, cherishing the human values, making this planet a better place to live in, that has to seep into our curricular goals. And then only the transformation will have any possibility to be seen.
So we often hear of barriers, like you talked about. We have it on paper, but it's so difficult to implement it on the ground. If I'm
Yeah,
allowed to probe further, can you
yeah.
articulate a couple of these significant barriers that we face today? For example, there is a policy, but is there lack of support from the government? Is there not enough initiative from the schools? Why I'm trying to probe is that maybe some of us here are not aware of our biases, and
Mm.
maybe these barriers are from our end. Maybe we can redress our biases and try to redress the concern here.
Yes, of course. Couple of things here. So you remember the call to Swachhata Abhiyan given in this country by the Prime Minister of this country, and people laughed at it. You know, when he announced it from the rampart of Lal Killa on Independence Day, people said, "Oh my God, this is what the Prime Minister has to speak on such an important date." But what great significance it has for the country, right? And I think now people have embraced it, right? The same people who mocked, they see value in it. So what I'm trying to tell you is that one barrier, and I think that is universal barrier for any new thing, is our own mindset, is our own stereotypes, is our own thought processes. So that is one barrier, and that barrier can only be broken with a very, what we call inspiring leadership. That is where the role of the leadership comes, because leadership has the potential to change minds, to change your thoughts, to inspire you. So that is one barrier. You see, the second barrier, of course, is that when people become, self-centered, they think only about themselves, and that is also in a way connected to mindset only. But mindset change from being a self-centered to a multi-centered, or from local to region, to national level to universal level. And that is why I use the word global perspective in the beginning. So that is the second barrier we have to do. Third barrier, of course, is the societal barriers. So, say for example, when it comes to cleanliness, or when it comes to saving the climate, some of your social and cultural practices, which you think are against it, might become a barrier, right? So, say for example, the practice of using tons of flowers and throwing it in the holy rivers is considered a good practice. But is it really a good practice? Immersion of idols in the rivers. So that is what I mean by social and cultural practices. And of course, the barrier of barriers, as we call it, is the funding, the resources. That is also very, very important. I mean, say, for example, you must have heard in the last COP, the Conference of Parties, there is some kind of a pledge now that the developed nations will pump in this kind of money to improve technology, to support the developing nations. So there is a need of a lot of money also. So where will that resource come from? So these are the present barriers, and I'm sure there are people who know better than I know. They are working on it. They are researching. They're coming out with good solutions. As an optimist, I think we are heading for better days.
And so, as the principal of Alkin International, you have tried to overcome many of these barriers by yourself. Can you illustrate some of the initiatives that you have implemented in your schools, which have yielded tangible results for the students, for the community, and so to say, for the environment?
So yes, so when I was principal, I was very conscious of these things, and two or three things we did. Of course, the energy audit, I mentioned it in the beginning. The recycling, paper recycling, particularly the waste management, rainwater harvesting, cleanliness, greening the campus, bringing back the sparrows I told you in the beginning. All these practices, and that campus. I mean, at one stage, I was saying jokingly that even if the president of United States of America visits my campus, I don't have a place where I can request him to plant a tree. You see, because every conceivable inch was already planted. It's a small campus, of course. So these are some of the things which I can tell you. Yes, one thing I want to share, I was almost about to forget, that we did a census of all the trees as a plant education, and the teachers and children made a team. They became the census officers. And they identified the plant, their biological names, their medicinal value, what is its place, what it is biological, this species is all about, and we produced book which is called Gardenia Alcon. That is the name of the book. It has run into third edition now. So that was an initiative which brought the children and the faculty close to the plants. At least you enter your campus and you see a whole lot of plants. So what is this plant about? What does it do? Where does it come from? What is its common name? What is its biological name? Isn't it? So that was something that we did. At one stage, the recycled paper was used for making folders, for greeting cards, and things like that. So all those things were done. But the bigger contribution, that were the initial stages. But the bigger contribution was the implementing the what we call education for sustainable development. I mentioned you ESD. That how the curriculum mapping with the sustainable developmental goals, the advocacy, bringing more schools on board, bringing more children on board, and taking this climate education a little more than our own campus.
Great initiative, sir. Before we conclude the call, I am just curious if you have any specific call to action for three specific group of people who can bring about change in this situation. One would obviously be educators,
Yeah.
second, policymakers, and third, students.
Yeah. So policymakers, I think they have done their job by and large. Policies are there, and there is no dearth of policy. And if at all there is, policies will come. But whatever policies we have as of date, they are to be realized on the ground. And therefore, I said it before, I'm saying it again. Educators have a very, very pivotal role to play. Educators have the capacity to bring in transformation. For that, their own practices, if they become the role models of a green living, that will be very, very important. Children, they don't learn from listening as much as they learn from seeing a particular behavior, right? So that is something very, very important. Of course, in the modern age, the thought process of a highly consuming society, that has to make a change. So teachers and students have to come together, and we have to bring in some kind of moderation in our behavioral, attitudes towards consumption, towards producing. The waste is to be minimized. We talk to the children that you go to the hotels, how much you waste, and imagine what you have wasted could have saved the life of millions of children who have nothing to eat, isn't it? So this kind of sensitivity we can bring in, and you see, the whole thing is that we have to give new meaning to our whole process of education. If earlier the process of education was to make yourself more prosperous, I think that prosperity is incomplete if it is not wedded with sustainability. So a sustainable prospering will include others also, and hence this inclusion, the diversity, making our institutions strong, collaboration. I think these are the things that students and teachers should work together.
Thank you so much for all these insights, sir. Before we conclude this call, I give the floor to you if you have anything in mind that you want to share with us.
No, thank you very much. I think you have framed it very nicely. You gave a very lucid flow to the whole thing. Most of my thoughts I was able to articulate, but as a conclusion, I would only say that those 2 years of the lockdown, I remember, and then that was the time when people really came back to nature again, and as educators, we were all so happy for that part, not for COVID. I hope I'm not mistaken. But all of us started, the moment lockdown was over, we again started talking. oh my God, what will happen? Will we stick to what we are today, or we will go back to our old habits? And this discussion was always divided. Some people said, no, 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 it's a big lesson. How can we forget this lesson? And the other group equally vehemently will say, no, 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 we are human beings. Our memories are very short lived, and we will go back to our old habits. I leave it to you and the listeners of this podcast to decide whether we learned our lessons or we did not learn our lessons.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you very much, Anirudh.
Thanks for joining me in this episode of Is Climate Change Your Concern? This would not have been possible without the invaluable support of the Future Founders Core team, and I'm grateful for that. The key takeaway from this conversation is that climate education should not only be about imparting knowledge and upskilling students, but also about nurturing climate conscious individuals with a global perspective and values that prioritize coexisting with nature. Ashok sir shared numerous strategies to achieve this, with a common theme emphasizing the importance of practical, experiential learning alongside theoretical knowledge. This means fostering a direct connection with nature as a foundational step. Do let me know what you think about this episode, and if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and share it with your friends. See you next week.